Well, thank you. Thanks to the ambassador, to Dove, to Colombia for having us here. This is a topic that I certainly focus on every day, and all the panelists do. It's kind of all I certainly think about. And I would argue this permeates every aspect of our worlds, from business, economy, politics, geopolitical issues, etc. This concept of truth and authenticity today in a world that has digitized, truly digital transformation has gripped every aspect of our life. I used to be a foreign service officer with the State Department and a US diplomat in a variety of embassies around the world, and I saw it affect some of the highest level issues, from conflicts to everything in between. Today in the private sector, working on those same issues. So I'm excited to dive in today with these three experts as well. We have a variety of folks and somebody on screen. Thanks for, can you hear us okay, MacKenzie, on screen?
Yes, I can hear you guys.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'll briefly introduce the panel here, but they really are quite exceptional, and I hope you had a chance to kind of look them up. First, we have Julia Angwin, an award-winning investigative journalist, best-selling author, New York Times contributing opinion writer, and a democracy fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, Shorenstein Center on Media and Public Politics. Alexios Mantzarlis, hopefully perfect, okay, great. Director of the Security, Trust, and Safety Initiative at Cornell Tech. Fun fact, yesterday I was with Alexios at Cornell Tech, where they had a fantastic event on content authenticity. Prior to that, Alexios was with Google, where he created a lot of red teaming on Google's search content policy and AI systems. We have MacKenzie Sadeghi, editor of the AI and Foreign Influence for NewsGuard. MacKenzie previously worked as a fact checker for the USA Today on misinformation related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Was there misinformation around COVID? I didn't know that. And then finally, Janet Haven, the executive director of Data and Society, who has worked at the intersection of these issues for years, and from 2022 to 25 served on the National AI Advisory Committee and is an advisor to the UN Secretary General's high-level advisory body on AI. So thank you all. And forgive me for even shortening your resumes. You have a lot that you have done and continue to do. So I want this panel to just be really interactive, and I would love to kind of get your thoughts. And obviously, we're going to want your questions. So let me start with kind of a primer question. What keeps you up at night when you're thinking about authenticity and truth in this world? Is there something that you really are concerned about that maybe is less obvious or very obvious to the world? So why don't we start down and we'll work this way.
Can you guys hear me? Is that working? Okay, good. All right. Well, hi. Good morning, everyone. Is it morning? Yes, it is. Good morning. It's great to see you all here. So I was thinking about this question, what keeps me up at night? Because, you know, there are many, many things. Not all of them are AI related, but many of them are AI related, because that is what I spend a lot of time thinking about. And I guess I would just say, to be slightly complicating, is I think that a lot of what we're probably going to be talking about is content and the ways that AI is affecting content and trust. And I want to start by saying that I think I spend a lot of time staying awake at night and worrying about how the entire AI project is built on essentially a breach of trust and on the idea of deception. And so I wanted to give kind of three levels of what I mean by that. And these are actually literally things I think about it in the middle of the night. So one of them is that the whole push, sort of starting at the top level, like the goals level, like what are we even doing? Like, why are we here talking about AI? And a lot of the reason for that is because there is an imaginary around the idea of artificial general intelligence, which has been pushed by a very few people in the tech industry, in the AI industry, that has captured the imagination of investors, of our government, and is driving both capital and geopolitics in a way that is amazing for a concept that does not exist and is contested as to whether it can exist. So now AI does exist. It's a big blanket term. It means all kinds of things, but it is existing now. AGI, artificial general intelligence, which has driven enormous amounts of investment in companies, in data centers around the country and around the world. It's driving investment in many of your countries, is still a concept that is contested. Would it even exist? And this idea of a overarching, omnipotent system that can really do anything, that has consciousness, perhaps, that can act in the world. So I want to start from that level of kind of deception and breach of trust that I think is really important to pull out. A second way that I've seen that is in design, that these systems that we encounter, like ChatGPT, are designed to be, they're designed to be anthropomorphized, right? Like, we think of them as a person. We think of them as something that we can talk to, that we can have maybe an emotional relationship with. And that's a design choice, right? ChatGPT doesn't think, it doesn't feel anything, it doesn't feel for you, it doesn't have any relationship with you at all. But it was designed with an interface to make you feel that there's a person on the other side, that you are in relationship with them. And then the third way that I want to point to, and this is just a plug for something that my own organization put out recently, is not just mis and disinformation at the content level, but also frauds and scams, that sort of social infrastructure of using generative AI to scam people. And we just put out a primer called Scam GPT, fraud, scam, and in the era of AI. It's on our website. That really kind of dives into how these systems are being used to perpetuate scams and fraud around the world. So I will stop there. So my 3 things.
Thank you very much. Julia, please.
You're not getting any sleep, are you? That's a lot of things to think about at night. Well, I guess I would say that I'm going to do a little bit more of a personal thing, which is I grew up in Palo Alto in the belly of the beast. I grew up coding since I was in elementary school. I grew up with parents who were in the early days of the what was then the personal computer industry. And I grew up believing that the technological revolution was essentially an extension of the scientific revolution. And I really believed in the promise of all this, because my understanding at a very broad level of human history is we used to receive truth from people who said that they talked to God. That was like the mechanism for truth delivery to humans. And then we developed science, which was like, cool, we need some evidence for that truth, and we're going to develop that evidence. And initially, the technological revolution grew out of the scientific revolution. But now what's really weird is we have decided to hand truth determination to machines. And they are not designed for that. I mean, that's just not their business. Even the makers of AI will tell you these are not designed to tell you the truth. They are designed to tell you something plausible. That is literally their design spec. And so as a person in the field of journalism, which saw itself as, I would say, the first wave of truth investigators, like the best case argument for journalism is that we are the first ones over the breach to say, hey, there's this thing happening in the world that hasn't been noticed or hasn't been adequately focused on, seems like it needs investigating. And then science would come in and validate, or researchers would say that's true, that's not true, that we're the first ones over the wall. To see that wall suddenly become machines and us as just weird people who like enter information into the machine that then decides whether that information is true seems like an incredible bastardization of this technological progress that we've made. And so I guess I'm worried at night that like my entire life and profession, not me as just me as a journalist, but actually anyone who's in the business of truth seeking are becoming like weird digital serfs to some sort of machine that that is built by profit seeking entities, not public service related missions. So that's it. That's all I worry about.
That's an amazing point. And I definitely want us to touch on that because I would imagine one of the things, and there is a lot of discussion in the zeitgeist about this, but this idea of replacement. I mean, there's going to be jobs, industries, things that are going to be replaced that are going to cause social upheaval in all of our countries. And that's something I definitely want to touch on. Before we get to Alexios, MacKenzie, you're kind of in between. So you're next and then Alexios. So MacKenzie, if you can hear us, you're up.
I think what concerns me the most and keeps me up from a disinformation perspective is the concept of LLM grooming, which we're seeing more recently. As someone who tracks disinformation from Russia, China, and Iran, it's been well established that these actors have been using AI systems to create more convincing deepfakes and propaganda. But what we're seeing in more recent months is that these actors are now targeting the underlying infrastructure of these models and the data that they are using to train and respond to queries from users about news. And what they're doing is pumping out a bunch of content across social media websites and domains across the internet repeatedly. And as a result, these chatbots are picking up this information and repeating these false claims as truth. So I think this is a very concerning threat that, we're seeing more and more that's starting to grow, where these actors are targeting the underlying system and these tools that people are using to get news and information and get the truth.
Yeah, hi. It's so great to be on this panel. I have used the material from all three of you in my trust and safety class. Also, this morning, my very first job was at the United Nations. This morning, as I was getting ready, it was like, should I wear a tie? And fellas, I'm sorry, I should have worn a tie. But yeah, it's nice to be here on this such an important topic. I'm a former fact checker, among other things. So obviously, I'm always worried about lies in the political space and how AI has turbocharged that. Although, and we'll get into that, I think, and Julie and I have spoken a little bit about this. It looks like in that sphere, the benefit, the drawback of AI has been more to cocoon people into their existing beliefs and kind of turbocharge their confirmation bias. But if I had to kind of go up my list of horrors, I think kind of AI slop flooding the zone with just gibberish is at 4. I think impersonation is at 3, and we'll get into that maybe later. I think at 2, scams, very much kind of billion-dollar industries around using AI to extract money and harm people's lives. But number 1, and I'm sorry to go like way into the horror of it all, is synthetic non-consensual intimate imagery, and that very much keeps me up at night. I don't know the extent to which folks know these tools that take one photo of a woman and girl, because it is designed to be an abusive and one-sided tool, and turns it into a nude version of that same photo. It requires nothing other than upload an image from someone's Instagram. It is a pandemic in schools, an epidemic in schools around the world. 6% of US teens have told Thorn that they have been targeted. That's, conservatively 1 million kids. There's obviously evidence from around the world of hundreds of these cases. And so that keeps me up at night for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the harm to kids, the harm to women who have an opinion online, who have been targeted by these nudes, and in some occasions kind of dropped out of the public sphere because of it. And the frankly absolution of responsibility from the part of tech platforms, including my former employer, Google, that should be throwing everything they have at it and are going at it as if it was just another bad thing on the internet, when we've had 6 years of evidence that the deepfake revolution was going to be first and foremost a tool of abuse and harassment in this form. So just this week, I have the publication as a side with Craig Silverman, who's an investigative reporter on this beat for decades, I should say. And I found 2,600 ads on Meta running for AI nudifiers. This is the 5th time I have found 4-digit ads on the platform from the same operation in the past year. This is just not okay. And it is bewildering because we have seen this happen. We have seen the real harm take place. And now what we're seeing is these nudifiers are not just taking a photo and turning it into a nude. They can turn it into a photo of that person in a sex pose or in a short video of them undressing. So this is an emergency. To Janet's point, AGI is being used to kind of distract us from the real harms that are urgent, immediate, and frankly, a lot of people should be held criminally responsible for.
Excellent point. And in fact, so you made the point, and all of you did, but there are the headlines when we talk about AI and what it's going to produce and what the future looks like are all concerning and things we should be addressing. You know, obviously the velocity of disinformation and all of these areas, but what Alexios raises is a very real harm that is happening today. It is not hypothetical. And to your point, it's a global issue. Obviously, we hear a lot about the statistics here in the US and Canada, but I read a report that it's also rampant in South Korea. I forgot who issued that report. Let me pull on that a little bit. How do we push back? Did you all see the Bellingcat report where there was a very prominent nudifier app, Mr. Deepfakes, and they actually identified the person who ran it. And it turned out to be not a state sponsor, not some sophisticated organization. It was a pharmacist in Canada. His side job was running one of the most prolific websites for non-consensual intimate imagery, which shows the barrier of entry is so low. How do we push back? How do we actually stop these real harms in NCII and CSAM, which is related in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can start. Or yeah. So there's this concept in trust and safety of the content moderation stack, right? That there are various layers in the moderation where you can address a harm, right? And we need to go all the way down the stack, right? We must certainly amp the pressure to 1,000 on the platforms that still kind of feel queasy about this stuff, right? And for all the bad that I will say about the very big tech platforms, you will call them and the stuff will go down in a moment, right? Like that's the case. Then there's there's gonna have to be regulation, and regulation in this space, I worry a little bit because it has taken the form of targeting the ultimate user who creates and shares the image, which obviously bears a big responsibility. But I want to note that in some of these cases, they are teenagers who need to be taught and like prevented from entering into a bad habit with AI. And we are not doing that in school. So while I do not want to kind of reduce their responsibility, I also want to notice that we are targeting them through criminalization, but have not done enough to target the tools and generators. Even the Take It Down Act that passed in the United States requires a post hoc removal, right, within a 48-hour notice. It doesn't say you should just not have this stuff. In my reporting, again, I found that the ads pointed to apps on the Apple Store and the Play Store, that X has verified an account with 100,000 followers for one of these apps. So there's a lot to be done at that layer. But then, to connect to Mr. Deepfakes and wrap up, Mr. Deepfakes, there are two victories that I will take, because otherwise I'm just going to be like kind of the grim guy here. First, Mr. Deepfakes is down, and we need to celebrate that. Mr. Deepfakes is down. I'm still haven't corroborated it, so please don't quote me outside of this room on it. But my sincere belief is that they are down because the content delivery network, CDN77, that served as the infrastructure for Mr. Deepfakes, got scared because they're based in the United Kingdom, and the Online Safety Act there has a lot of bite. And my suspicion, again, they are not answering my emails. Or why, is that they got scared and pulled it, right? And so that's one victory. The other victory just this week is my new hero, San Francisco City Attorney, David Chu. Please don't become a horrible person, David Chu. Is that he's taken a lawsuit against a lot of these organizations, and one of them just settled for $100,000 in civil liability, which is peanuts. But the most important thing is that they've turned off these websites. So we need to go up and down the content moderation stack until it just becomes unbearably expensive, embarrassing, and intolerable to have this stuff online.
Great response. MacKenzie, in your studying of the pushing out of kind of disinformation, particularly from state sponsors, are you seeing them leveraging NCII as a method to maybe silence journalists or critics of their regimes or anything like that?
So what we're seeing primarily is them leveraging many of the chatbots available for propaganda. We haven't really seen use of NCII, but the main use we're seeing right now is using these tools to generate these campaigns and to target the systems of these AI models. So last month, we put out a report about a network of 150 Moscow-based news sites called the Pravda Network, and this network is estimated to publish about 3.6 million articles a year, tens of thousands of articles per week, and it's using these automated translated tools and scraping content from Telegram channels, Kremlin officials, press conferences, and publishing that content out en masse. And what our audit of the 10 leading AI systems found was that the chatbots directly cited articles from this Pravda network a third of the time and were unable to recognize that these were actually propaganda sites and repeating those narratives. So we're seeing that these efforts, where they're putting out these networks that aren't really designed to reach humans, but rather the web crawlers and the technologies that are being used to do this training data are being targeted, and those efforts have been successful so far.
Very interesting. Thank you. Over to Julia.
Are we talking about, sorry, remind me, this is about what we should do about
Pushing back on the NCII,
Yeah.
but if you want to pick up on the state sponsor.
I mean, I think honestly, the issue at a really high level here is liability, right? Like this is what happens is people do bad things unless they think the risk of the bad thing is too high, right? And so we haven't raised the risk high enough. And I mean, most of you know this, but in the US is really bizarre in not having a comprehensive data privacy law. Every other peer nation has one. We've tried to pass one and failed. And we have a few state laws that are disparate and disparately enforced. And so we don't have a real liability regime for any of these types of harms that happen with people's data, right? Whether it's non-consensual nudes or basically poisoning an LLM with, floods of information to try to get it to regurgitate your story. And so these are all data harms, and we have not put any regime in place to make the consequences of those abuses of data meaningful enough to prevent them. And that is most obvious with Meta, right? Like the idea that you continuously bring them thousands and thousands of ads that they are letting onto their network and they don't do anything about it. It just shows that it doesn't matter to them because there's no cost. There's no cost except maybe an article or two here or there. And they have already, like all of these tech companies, crossed the line from just claiming to be good actors to living their don't be evil lives, right? And so they've all moved over to that side of the fence. They're fully into evil. And so public shaming isn't working anymore. Like it sort of worked for like a few minutes there, but we need a stronger mechanism. And so, I mean, and this is all, everything I'm saying is obvious, and this is obviously not an administration that is likely to promote a good, responsible data privacy act when they themselves are going from administration to administration, stealing all of the data in violation of the Federal Privacy Act of 1974, one of the few privacy laws we do have that prevents all these agencies from sharing data and trying to build a master database in order to surveil all of Americans. So we're in a bad place. Sorry.
I'm not going to be the cheerful one. I'm sorry. Yeah, I've worked on policy, on AI policy for the past 3-4 years, and everything that was put in place under the Biden administration has been unraveled for the most part, or is still in place at the federal level, but isn't being enforced. So we did start to see some real movement, and I think one of the things Julia and I argue about this all the time. One of the things I think we can say even about everything that has been unraveled is that the Biden administration demonstrated to the United States that technology is governable, right? There are things that we can do. There are laws that we can put in place, because I would say before the Biden administration, that was a contested idea. Like maybe it was just all too complicated and we couldn't really do anything about it, or we couldn't really put any sort of liability on top of it. And I think that has changed, but that change also brought about an enormous pushback against regulating technology, regulating the AI environment. And I think, Julia points to the sort of baseline thing, which is a data privacy law, a federal comprehensive data privacy law, which we lack in the United States. Congratulations to many of you from other countries that you probably actually have that in your country, which is great. But that's not the only law we need. We definitely need that. So, I think one of the things, just as an example, that we're facing right now is that because there's been essentially everything that happened under the Biden administration was on the agency side. So it was regulatory, which is easy to unravel, or executive orders or whatever. Congress doesn't pass laws about this stuff, as it turns out. And when they get close to passing a law, like, honestly, they're not great. And so it's gone to the state level. And so we have seen actually a great deal of experimentation at the state level, both from attorneys general trying to figure out how to enforce existing laws on the books to put in place some of these protections, like basic civil rights laws. But we've also seen new laws around AI systems be, kind of tested out at the state legislator level. The problem that we have now is that in the big budget bill that is working its way through our Congress, there is an attachment into it that would prevent, that's called the state moratorium, that would prevent the states from making any laws related to AI for 10 years, because we need to find out, it's too early to regulate. We need to find out what might happen, which is obviously ridiculous based on, the kinds of things that we're hearing. And this law will probably, this sort of clause will probably not pass in the budget bill for a bunch of administrative reasons, but it's going to come back around. And so the game right now in the United States is to do nothing at the federal level, or to pass bad, very weak laws, or to, and at the same time to block state activity in regulating and passing laws at the state level.
I just wanted to add one other really depressing thing, which is that the U.S. is also, looking to meddle with the EU laws, right? So the EU does have some strong regulations here, but now the tide is turning and the U.S. is sort of supporting the tech companies in defiance of these laws. So we are, just in an extra bad place.
But let's pick up on that. So earlier this week, I was down in Washington at the SCSP AI Expo, wonderful event. And there is a school of thought, domestic policies aside, that AI innovation truly is now a geopolitical competition. And there is a belief that the US and China are engaged in a significant geopolitical battle on AI. What do you say to those that say we cannot put the brakes on innovation because, other countries are going to be moving forward? And there are a lot of those in Europe that have actually criticized the AI Act for being very expansive and actually putting a damper on its own innovation. What are your thoughts of that? Whoever wants, please.
I'll start by saying the short thing, which is the binary of innovation versus regulation is a false choice. That is not how it works in any market. And that is not how it works in the technology industry. It's not how it should work. The specter of, an AI Cold War with China is something that I think has been heavily promoted to push back regulation. Now, that's not to say, and I just want to be really clear on this, that there aren't real geopolitical threats in the world, and that, to the conversation that was happening on the last panel, that the use of AI systems in warfare, in geopolitical conflict, will not be a major factor in the future. But the idea that we innovate at all costs, at cost to our values, to the safety of our citizens and non-citizens, and that innovation is not something that we want to shape towards a public good outcome through smart regulation is ridiculous.
Alexios, please.
Yeah, so look, like AI regulation means a lot of things, right? Like as we mentioned before, so my expertise is in the content space and the generalist models purpose. And I think this is a frankly ridiculous claim, and I would double quote Janet, because if the fear is China, ABC News, the Australian ones, just found 230 pages of censorship material that moderators of their LLM tools are being instructed to use. So what unregulated models are they seeing in China that I'm not aware of? I'd be curious. And with the EU AI Act, let's be serious, right? That the AI Act explicitly left out general purpose LLMs and was more about specialized things. Now, where there are worries, or where especially J.D. Vance train of thinking has been kind of focused on is actually more on the DSA side, right? The Digital Services Act and the responsibility it puts on platforms to have kind of countermeasures for systemic risk, and misinformation is one of these. And in that sense, the geopolitical battle is on, right? Like, we will see in the next 4 years whether the EU blinks or not on DSA, not on the grounds of the DSA, because the grounds of the DSA have already started to work their way towards a massive fine for X, not on AI stuff, but on kind of its verification issues. But the misinformation will inevitably take AI forms in upcoming suits, investigations. But if you're Ursula von der Leyen and you're on the negotiating table with the US delegation, and you've got Ukraine, and you've got tariffs, and you've got damn Greenland, then at some point you'll be like, you know what? We're gonna, whatever, we'll trade Meta as having a horrible user experience for the others because this matters. So that to me is the defining geopolitical battle of our information ecosystem over the next few years. And we'll see who blinks.
Now, no, thank you. Really fascinating. MacKenzie and Julia, I don't know if you've been tracking, but I'd be curious to know on the other side, right? Some of the other nations that may not be as open about their transparency or their laws in AI. We saw Saudi put heavy investment and actually sign, I believe, a chip deal with the Trump administration. You've seen investment from the UAE, from obviously China. How are other countries viewing the same? Are they seeing it as a geopolitical competition from your vantage points? Whoever wants to take that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely see this as a geopolitical battle. There was a AI conference last year where Putin was talking about how this is, the new frontier, and they need to compete with other countries when it comes to AI and get ahead. There was another roundtable in Moscow earlier this year where a bunch of officials were talking about, that concept of LLM poisoning and how by engaging in that, they could get pro-Russian viewpoints embedded into Western AI systems and technology. So I think they absolutely recognize, the advantage and the loopholes that they can weaponize to push their viewpoints. And I think that, there is a way to balance innovation with safety and invest in, these safeguard rails, and still, lead. But without these guardrails, I think we'll see that, those voids will be filled by these authoritarian countries. For example, with DeepSeek, we conducted an audit of it earlier this year and found that 60% of the time when responding to prompts about geopolitical topics, it advanced Beijing's viewpoint. So I think if these safety measures aren't implemented, these countries like China and Iran will be setting the standards and defining the rules.
I think I want to just say that there is some aspect of geopolitical competition, obviously, but I think if we talk about the LLMs themselves, these are massive money losers. Massive. Okay. So they cost trillions to build. They are not making very much money. And so, yes, people are like, I want to compete, but do they really? Like, who really wants to pour money into this sinking ship? What's easier is to build off of them, right? So, DeepSeek actually was built partly by using some of the existing infrastructure of the West, of the leading models on the West, and they figured out some hacks to make it cheaper to do. But that's you can't even really name another leading competing model. I guess maybe the French Mistral is the only real one out there but mostly they're in the US because that's where the investors are willing to suffer these massive, massive losses on a future that is as Janet was saying, who knows? Maybe there's some great AGI future out there, but right now it's a money sink.
That's a great point. No, please jump in.
I mean, I think the other thing related to what Julia is talking about is that the geopolitical competition is, I would say, at least to a significant degree, I don't know how much, being manufactured by the tech companies who are trying to sell to national governments, right? I mean, there was a big international event in February in Paris called the AI Action Summit. And it was sort of billed as this I don't know, public interest AI thing or a place for countries to come together. I will tell you, it was a trade show. I mean, it was just a full court press of NVIDIA, and less the open AIs, but the infrastructure companies, just literally pinning people from your countries up against the wall and trying to scare the crap out of them that if they didn't invest right now with everything they had, their economies would be destroyed. They would be left behind. The entire argument of is based on FOMO, right? And it is so speculative. I cannot emphasize this enough. It's you must build data centers in your country so that when the AGI comes and our AI overlords are here, that you are ready to go. This is not a good economic argument.
Yeah, please.
Thing about the Saudis you were talking about, in a massive frenzy like this, the best business to be in, right? Like this is during the gold rush is to sell shovels, right? So the Saudis are smart. They're not building their own LLM. They're just going to sell shovels, AKA chips, to the people who want to do it. So also look at where the smart money is going.
It's an excellent point. Like the gold rush analogy. Okay, so you all helped to paint a really big a great picture that one, it does not look like, at least here in the US, that we're going to have real regulation that's going to like tamp this down anytime soon. Also, kind of the tech companies themselves, it doesn't sound like you all have much hope that they themselves are going to self-regulate. And there may be some aspects of competition, maybe it's overblown, but there's a ton of money going into it, that we know. Are there technologies, mitigation tactics that might be arising that might help us lower the temperature a little bit, that might help businesses, governments, and consumers even detect what is authentic, what is synthetic, thereby kind of lowering the fog of war, so to speak, and bringing us back down to a kind of a shared sense of reality? Alexios, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, look, the big promise really since the ChatGPT broke big was let us do this thing, but we will give you labels in exchange. We are going to label AI generated content wherever you want us. We'll put a big fat AI label on it, and that will be our responsible AI policy strategy, platform implementation. Set aside that that's obviously not enough, but that has unfortunately, with the scrapping of all the commitments made under the Biden administration, even that has been rolled back, right? The labels that were once prominent are now behind 3 buttons. They're not anywhere near as comprehensive as they should be. Still, I think that should be the path forward, right? We were obviously in a summit yesterday all about provenance and the technologies that are necessary to keep track of not AI content, but original content from creation through dissemination to end user. And that, I think, is going to be more and more essential. And if you're an institution, if you're a truth generating institution and are not thinking about how to make sure that your content carries some form of provenance indicator with it as it kind of makes its way through the web, then that's something that should be fixed kind of immediately. Deepfake detectors are a mess, and there is a lot of snake oil in the space. I teach a red teaming class. In one afternoon, I had them break most of the main deepfake detectors that claim to have 99.96% accuracy rate, right? They don't. There's just no way that the detectors will catch things all the time.
Briefly touch on why can't we a system immediately recognize if something is synthetic or authentic?
Yeah, I mean, look, because there's a bunch of different ways in which you can try and identify these things. Sometimes there is a metadata, right? The big platforms are promising in their generated content that metadata will carry in various different forms, right? We're not going to get into that too much, but by and large, these tools are trained on previous data. The new data does not match necessarily the old data, and there's a discrepancy. And at the internet scale, anything other than 99.9999% is a mess and is functionally useless. And so these labels should say not just like, we think it's AI generated for these reasons, this is the actor. There should be like a ton more context. And the context should have 2 audiences, right? Let's be clear. There should be context for an audience of like journalists, researchers, et cetera, who find it and can then translate and explain and raise the flag about that content. And then there's some kind of warning sign for the user, the average user, right? Like my mom who sends me stuff and like just can get that as like an immediate step. What should also happen with the labels, but it's the opposite is happening, is what my friend Rene DiResta calls a circuit breaker, right? Like, and so you know, adopted by past and other technologies where we slow things down, right? Like we slow the virality down of this content where we think it may be AI generated. Instead of getting that, we have a whole app from Meta that's only AI stuff. But yes, I think in an ideal world, labeling and kind of smart context that leads into a reduction of virality is the answer.
Do you have a favorite mitigation tactic?
Well, I think I'm largely, you're not going to be surprised to hear I'm like largely skeptical of a lot of these mitigation tactics because they haven't been proven to work. You know, proving provenance is really hard. It's a hard technical problem. It hasn't been solved. And whenever it gets, quote, solved for a second, people just strip the label off the content. And so I think one mitigation that I do have some optimism about, although I don't really know any, doesn't seem like any of the social media platforms are in the mood for it, is actually to do a little bit more context around the person sharing the information. So for instance, if you saw a person and next to their little picture before their tweet or whatever we want to post, there was just a word cloud, words that you usually commonly use in their tweets. And if every single one is conspiracy, Biden, Hunter Biden laptop, whatever, you know what you're dealing with. Do you know what I'm saying? And so there's a lot of really easy things, and that's just one way you could have context, but having context around the sharer is actually really important and super easy to automate. Like, this is a account that's only been alive for 30 days and has no followers or whatever, right? Or this is an account that's been on known bot lists. Like, there's just much more context we could have about the theoretically people, which are not always people that we're interacting with and that are providing this information, that I think there's a lot more evidence and feasibility on that path than there is, I think, on the provenance path.
And just I actually tend to agree on this with a couple of caveats. So like at SLEEP, actually, Camille Francois teaches here, has this moderation framework of actors, behaviors, content, right? And what Julia is saying is we need to up the level of transparency information about the actor level online so that people can make these calls. I'd say kind of two things on that, though, is just this week, my colleague Craig found that, so LinkedIn has been doing this very big push to verify accounts, right? And they have certain inbuilt advantages because they can ask your employer because they know who your employer is. They can ask you to put an ID because you're fine putting your actual persona on there. But what Craig found was that there is now an active renting market for verified LinkedIn accounts to use for scams, even just to like make recruiting leads for companies, etc. So people who don't really care about their LinkedIn anymore, they'll like rent it out, and there are companies that claim that they can get 10,000 messages out in this way. So 100%, and it's slightly different from like what the context that Julia is saying. But of course, as we go further down the account route too, the more we increase the value of any one signal, the more adversaries are going to try and find ways to hijack that signal.
So we're going to go to audience questions in 1 minute. MacKenzie, I wanted to tap you in. Alexios cited Renee DeTesta's idea of slowing down the virality. I think velocity is one of the major things that have changed from traditional disinformation, the way we take in content. From your experience, do you think these disinformation campaigns you see running, if they were slowed down, would the efficacy of them also be less, or would it not really help mitigate the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I do think volume really does play a big part in it, but I don't think it would help mitigate the problem entirely, because people are going to be coming across this content no matter where it is. And I think the point Julia mentioned about, adding context and giving users that additional information about a source is super important, and I agree is one of the best mitigation ways. And that's something we're actively engaging in too. So we create these labels for news and information sources across the web, and once you open that site, you click on the browser extension and it gives you a 10-page document about who owns the site, what type of content it's published in the past, whether it discloses its editors and its content creators. So it's essentially that same thing, we were talking about for social media, but at the domain level. And I think giving users that additional information about the source so that they can make their own informed judgment about whether or not to trust them is one of the best way forwards and engaging in that sort of pre-bunking process.
Awesome. Thank you. Janet, is there anything you want to add on that? Okay. Why don't we, Dove, I don't know if there's a microphone or I think maybe people can even just raise their voice, but questions. So I see a hand in the back left, one up first. And just maybe if you could just tell us where you're from and who you directing the question from to, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I work here at the UN Secretariat in New York. I'm originally from France. Not directed at anyone in particular, just a general comment and general advice from you guys if you have any. As in my line of work, we engage with a lot of different partners, a lot of different member states, and sometimes it feels like we're talking about different things because we see things in a different way. It's almost like we have different versions of the truth. And I was wondering, how do you suggest to engage with in these contexts with these people? It's not necessarily that either one of us is wrong. It's just, it's hard to understand each other because we just perceive things in a different light. So I'm wondering if it's a question of beliefs almost. It's not even actual facts. And also I was wondering if there was a turning point as to when it became so polarized in the societies that we live in, if there was a specific time frame where it became that way, or has it always been this way? Because it feels lately like it's very, very polarized, but maybe it's because of social media and the way we interact, but maybe it has always been like this in the past. And a second question, maybe, if I may, you talked briefly about AI currently losing money, AI businesses losing money, but when Facebook also started out, it was losing money a lot because it was building up and now it's a monster of tech. So, and it's because it's also diversified itself in its business. So do you see also a way for AI to start diversifying and making money in any kind of way? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take that first? Julia, please.
Well, I'll take the, hippy dippy part of it because that's my role here. But I think when you talk about the truth generally, like, I think that's a really, as a journalist, right? That's my business. I interview 6 people who are at the same event and they all tell me different things about what happened. So truth is, I always say, like, it's a journey, not a destination. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I think the idea of building a machine to deliver the truth is on its face, as Janet said, like, it's preposterous, right? It's just, it goes against all of our human experience and all of our scientific achievement, which is essentially that truth is iterative, right? Like, there was a time that we thought leeches were the way to treat disease, and like then we developed other ways, and we're going to learn in 20 years that the things we're doing now are a mistake. And so it's all about building on the evidence and being like really rational and examining the results, right? The results are what matter, right? My husband is from India and he thinks when you're sick, you have to drink turmeric and milk. I think it's disgusting, but like, honestly, it works for him. And I have lemon, ginger, honey tea, and we're fine. But like, one day this will get sorted out. Somebody will do a study and then one of us will know that our approach is correct. And so I just want to put my money on the science part of it. In terms of the financial part of AI, obviously they're going to monetize it with ads. That's what they did with Facebook. And it's a terrifying concept, right? Because like, basically, just, I'm speaking again as a journalist, like, the Facebook, by providing that targeted ads, that you could basically destroy the news business. That was our entire financial backbone, was that you would buy an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle to reach people in San Francisco. Then you could just choose on the drop-down menu in Facebook, San Francisco, it costs 30 cents instead of $300. and poof, my industry's gone. The idea that they're going to do that with the last remaining 5 journalists that are left and just take all their money away and be like, no, the truth machine is populated entirely by basically bot farms that Putin built. That is actually terrifying, but will be very profitable.
Does anybody want to add on to that?
Maybe I'll say one thing on your kind of how do we come out of this, or when did it happen? Like, I think kind of Rawlsian political philosophy teaches us that like we need an anchor for a functioning demos, and that his challenge at the time was like the death of God as the anchor of like kind of constitutional agreements within societies, and you know he had this liberal recommendations. But I think my hypothesis or suggestion is that what happened is the internet and the democratization of kind of information gathering and sharing put a spotlight on the very real flaws of our sources of fact generation, the news media, science, institutions, etc. And like, you know, there were real issues. And then that got weaponized by people to whom it was convenient to say, all right, well, don't trust them at all. It's not just like, let's try and fix science. Let's defund science altogether. All references purely hypothetical. And so I think like, how do we rebuild a shared trust on our fact generating institutions? I don't know, but I think that's what may be different. At the same time, I refute this like post-truth label that some folks keep saying, as if there was one point where politicians only said the truth and we all went voting because of fact 1, 2, and 3, right? That's just never been the case, obviously.
No, thank you. In fact, I teach a class here in the spring, and we looked at the year 2012 as actually a pretty big inflection point. It was an election year, but a lot of algorithmic changes on social media that really pushed forward a lot of this disinformation. Some people go back to the late 90s, the establishment of cable news and things like that, here, at least here in the US. Other hand, I don't know who, yes, sir.
Thank you. I already got the mic, so my name is Oliver. I work at the Austrian mission here at the UN. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I think we all understand the necessity to push back on mis and disinformation. But I'm wondering where do we draw the line? So when does protecting from harm, filtering out misinformation, when does it infringe on the freedom of expression and opinion? When does it become censorship? Because by default, there are instances of overreach. There will be instances of overreach. This is kind of built in both on social media platforms, but also national legislation. So how do we push back without negatively impacting free speech? So the old problem of who watches the watchdog, to rephrase that a little bit, because I haven't heard too many concerns now so far from the panelists, which maybe concerns also me a little bit. Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
Just keep on talking, guys, until you stop me. You know, you're right to raise that concern. It's a really big concern. Most of the misinformation laws that have been passed around the world have been weaponized against journalists, actually, and against people who are dissenting against the regime. So the evidence so far is that laws about misinformation particularly are not solving this problem and also being used to crush dissent. And so that does not seem like the right strategy. I think when I'm talking about adding liability for these companies, I'm talking a little bit more about Section 230, which basically provides them immunity from any kind of liability. So for instance, there's endless battles about whether the platforms can promote, deep fake nudifiers, but even worse, like Amazon is constantly selling things that kill you, right? And if you do that at Target, you are liable. There's no question, like you have it on your shelves. And the law makes it like a different thing on the digital realm. And so I think like we need some baseline liability where it's like, no, you also just have to follow the law. One of the biggest battles Facebook fought forever was that whether they had to follow the Fair Housing Act, which basically says you can't discriminate against people who want to rent a house. You can't say like, oh, I'm only going to show my ads. So, it used to be the ads would say no black supply or something. They had this drop down menu in their ad buying thing, which was like, you could just literally say, buy the ad and then drop down, don't show it to African-American, the Asian American, like you could choose all the ethnicities you didn't want to show it to. And they fought, I think it was like a 7-8 year legal battle saying that they were immune from having to comply with the Fair Housing Act. They eventually had to, and there was a settlement, but actually like there's weird loopholes in it. So I'm talking more about leveling the playing field than I think these misinformation laws that have been used to, I think, in bad faith.
Janet, do you have anything?
Agree about the misinformation laws. I guess I would just say, and this I think is probably obvious, but I think that balance is, there is not a universal answer to that. It is highly contextual within the culture that we're talking about. I mean, I think there are probably some bright lines that almost every culture could agree upon, that we, don't want, that are things that are worthy of, being censored, like, nude pictures of 12-year-old girls being sent around. But I think that, this obviously is playing out really differently around the globe. And I think in the United States, like we are almost, I mean, I think it's fair to say, because of the First Amendment and, the kind of like both love for and cult around the First Amendment, that we are very unlikely to, put real controls in place around information until there is a absolute catastrophic situation, some kind of huge crisis. Whereas I think in European countries where, there is a much different approach to enforcing, hate speech, for instance, on platforms, that, you just see different outcomes. And so I think it's a little hard to have the conversation without a lot of context about the legal environment and the cultural environment that we're talking about. I mean, even in, the West has a very specific definition of privacy, which, doesn't hold, or of human rights, which, doesn't really translate to many other countries around the world. And so I think there's a lot of local negotiation that needs to happen for that.
Yeah, please.
Thanks for asking that, Oliver, because I think, for instance, some ways in which the UK Online Safety Act is being enforced worry me. Like, it seems like, and I'm not a legal expert, especially not a British legal expert, but it looks like there's targeting of the individual poster rather than the infrastructure. And that, I think, is the problem, right? Like, again, to requote Renee on something else, freedom of speech is not freedom of reach, right? So, like, say what you want, but like, or within legal burdens, but there's no reason for that to reach millions immediately, right? And so what has happened is, because over years we refused to regulate the infrastructure, then we saw the harms, whether it was measles epidemics, whether it was riots that stormed this country's capital, whether it's you name it. Then now there's this, like, to me, misguided attempt to go after the poster, the individual poster, a bit echoing what we're seeing with the nudifiers, right? Where the infrastructure is too difficult, too hard to figure out. Let's just go after the individual person. So I think you raised something valuable, and I'm glad you did, because I think we should have got into that.
MacKenzie, I want to make sure you're not forgotten here. Do you have any thoughts on when does pushing back against disinformation come censorship?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the solution, it doesn't always have to result in removal or blacklisting. And I think that's when and where people rightly start to worry about censorship and, their views being suppressed. And I think that's why providing context and transparency and more information is really crucial, and letting people make, those decisions themselves. We actually faced a lawsuit earlier this year from a left-wing news outlet called Consortium News, which was accusing us of defamation and violating its free First Amendment rights, because we had published a rating about the site, noting its history of spreading disinformation. And last month, a judge threw that lawsuit out, saying that, our rating of this source was adjacent to review for a restaurant that you would see online. So I think, a lot of these claims of censorship have failed legally and don't really always equate to censorship. And I think this idea and the solution of providing users with more information about the false claims that they're seeing and the sources they're coming across, rather than trying to remove them entirely, is, the stronger approach here.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get a couple more questions. Oh, great. Beating me with the mic. Great.
Thank you. I'm Daniela. I work for the United Nations, and thank you for this very, very interesting discussion. I wanted to ask you something about disinformation, and I think one of you mentioned this at the very beginning in the political space and related to elections, but more broadly in the political space in general. At the UN is not where I work, but we do some work on electoral assistance as well. And with the landscape that you have described and with what we see, of course, that happens, I wanted to ask you, because we definitely need to, there are efforts needed to update and to upgrade the mechanisms and the tools that we use precisely to provide this kind of assistance to target this kind of new risks and situations that we are facing. So in your perspective, in your opinion, what would be, or how would these new tools or upgraded tools would look like? I don't know if it's also in terms of the mitigating measures that you were talking about maybe from the consumer side. Is it about monitoring better, to assessing threats better, or to, some sort of civic education in the digital age kind of approach, or how we could do better our job in this scenario? Thank you.
I mean, and I know obviously Melissa Fleming has done a lot of work in this space too at the UN, and there is lots of media literacy to be done. I think, just in the Buenos Aires elections last couple of weeks ago, there was a deep fake at the very last minute of Mauricio Macri apparently endorsing, saying that he's pulling out from the pro. So like these things are happening, will happen. There's a point to which maybe kind of electoral commissions figure out a way to fingerprint the likeness of the top candidates, and kind of swiftly are able to say this is indeed genuine or not. I think thinking about candidates as high risk profiles, and I know Meta just got approval with the South Korean government to fingerprint, actually in that case, celebrities' faces on Meta because they're being targeted by scams. And so this, double-edged sword if you put it in Meta's hands, right? I think I heard Julia sigh. So, but and I agree. But I think the reality is there has to be kind of some preventative thing where as people try to put it online, it flags that it is someone that at the wrong moment and the wrong speech can do a lot of harm.
Does anybody want to add to that? Okay, let's see if we can get one last question in, please.
I don't want to be the last one, but so thank you so much for today and coming to talk to us about this. I think for many of us, it's actually a very new domain that we're also learning about. I'm Amelie with the European Union delegation to the UN. I had a few questions, and I think in good South-North cooperation, I'll let George also maybe have one after me, but I had one of those 1 million questions that was triggered when Julia mentioned the being in a bad place. So for Europe, we are trying to assure this kind of balance between regulation and some kind of accountability in all of this versus having some kind of innovation in there. So hence maybe the AI conference in Paris. What do you think? What do you think should be our approach in terms of ensuring that Europe in all of this is not really falling behind, but also trying to somehow work with the privacy regulations that we have in the different countries and that the EU sets up for EU member states? I mean, I know this is like a question that everybody's working on and trying to figure out, but of course, having your views on this would be helpful. The other question was more on access and leveling the playing field across the globe. So I don't know, we've been hearing a lot the term digital colonialism, which came up a lot in last year's Pact for the Future Global Digital Compact discussions at the UN level. And I was a bit interested in seeing how you see all of this, if there is a way that we can ensure that there's really equality across also across into the global south in terms of how to access not only technologies and be part of this entire innovation, but also to harness the great talent that is also there. That would be maybe one question. And then maybe George.
Thank you. Good segue. I think I'll just take it from there. George Commander, Permanent Mission of Sierra Leone to the UN. I think you touched upon my question really in terms of digital access, or in terms of, I think the topic itself, the panel discussion centered on the feature of truth. My question simply, whose truth it is? I think it's very important, particularly from the global south, where people do not have that much access as the West, or do not in that sense. But at the same time, we see international consultancies going back there, for particular example, election periods in African countries, they hire consultants from the West, and build up a whole lot of data, whether truthful data or ethical data, and use that. Opposition or maybe incumbents use that against opposition use that against incumbent in that regard. So whose truth really? Because the truth is defined by those who have access. And without access, it makes it even difficult for the mass citizenry, in that sense, to make authentic decisions that this is their own, in that sense. I'm a civic educator. I write on civic citizenship in my country. I have a book published on that. So every time I go back home, we have surveys and things like that. It's the same question about resources, about access, about who are we actually supposed to be listening to. So the feature of truth itself is a question that we must also really try to dig deep on, and it's very important. There's a survey, I think, during my time at Oxford, that a couple of professors came and decided to form a group about citizenship in the network age. So there were a lot of questions, and all of that also goes back to this access opportunities and whose truth it is. So I really, maybe from your amazing experiences, particularly to Alexio, I think you deal with fact checking and all of that, maybe you must have encountered that question before, and now maybe you can resolve that in the short time that we have. Thank you.
So let's see if we can do rapid responses. We have access, we have Europe falling behind. So who wants to jump in?
So I would say to your first question about essentially how should Europe kind of approach this moment? I mean, it seems like a really big question, so I wouldn't say I know the answer to that. But I mean, I guess I would say two things. One is that I think with the EU AI Act, there was it was a really, I think, strong prescient effort to, put in place regulation. And I think it got a bit tripped up on not anticipating sort of the next thing that happened in the technology, not anticipating generative AI. It was really written for a particular type of AI that now has not been superseded, but has been augmented by generative AI. And so I think one thing is to think about governance from the perspective of like a core set of values, as opposed to a particular technology. Because the values, and I would point to, for instance, the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which is a document that came out of the Biden White House, I think has a good set of like 5 core principles of like, this is what regulation should be built around, regardless of the technology, because okay, now we have Gen AI, then we're going to have agentic AI, then we're going to have quantum computing. Like it's just going to, so we can't tie these huge multi-year legislative efforts to like a particular moment in time on technology. That's one thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say that applies both to Europe and I think also to sort of how do we approach technology in the majority world? How do we approach the reality of technological colonialism, which is absolutely happening, is, kind of goes back to where I started, which is that this like myth of AGI is like dominating the environment. And I think that Europe and many other countries have an opportunity to look beyond the idea that the only way to win in technology is through scale. That's the argument that is being pushed by OpenAI and NVIDIA and all these big companies, because they can sell you more stuff. And if you think about, if you look to the models that are being developed, where technology is being advanced, the AI is being advanced, not through a scaling approach, but through these many other innovative approaches, because there are a lot of them, that may be a way forward that is actually the most innovative and the least resource intensive, the most environmentally sound, and gives you the ability to build for local environments, which is what we really need. You don't really want to have these Western American products sort of imposed upon the majority world. So
I think we're about a minute over. Is that, it's okay? So maybe if someone wants to touch on the access, because I know there was 2 questions. Who has thoughts on ensuring equal access across the globe?
I think, the access point and about these models being truth being defined by the people who have access to building these systems and not representing those who are using it is really important. And, if all of these models are trained on English language, Western centric data, then these models are going to absorb biases about certain topics and religions and regions. So I think it really comes down to more collaboration with communities in these underrepresented areas and investing more in local on the ground journalism, to have reliable, trustworthy data that can be used for these systems and, lead to more development and making them more diverse so they're more accurate in those regions. And I think it's really important because in a lot of these spaces where, regions where the media is dominated by state-controlled sources and there's less independent, reliable media, we'll see them performing less in those regions. And I think, that's where we need to pay the most attention to.